All right, I'm Rasmus. I think it's the first time I've ever given a talk in rubber boots. It's not my first time at a castle, though. I gave a talk at an Indian castle a few years ago, a huge church in Mexico City one time, in a really busy bar in Copenhagen, and on a cruise ship once in the Mediterranean, where I was very sick. Anyway, my slides are online here, talks.php.net, dev break, at Rasmus on Twitter. I am probably the only person you will meet who's from Greenland. Northern Greenland even, a little island off the coast of Greenland, way up here, called Kakasaswak. It looked like this. This is me, 50 years ago. So not just 25 years of PHP, you're getting the whole thing. More me in Greenland. The family out on a trip in the dog sled. Our house, very, very remote. House in the summertime. You can see there wasn't much there other than rocks, icebergs, mountains. Me starting to get technical. So, anyway, that's where I started. By the time I got a bit older, I got my first computer. It had 1K of memory. Can you imagine that? 1K, right? There are a lot of young faces in the crowd. You've never, ever seen a computer with 1K of memory. You program those things very, very differently than you program today's computers. You know every single bit, even, not just byte, every single bit of your program, you know what it's doing and why it's doing it. Because if you don't do that, it just won't work. The big box at the back here was a 16K memory expansion, and I thought, I have no idea what to use with all this memory, what to do with all this memory. I mean, 16K, wow. That was a lot of memory. It would also fall out, which was really confusing, because then I would suddenly go from 17K to 1K. It would toggle. It was hard to deal with. Other computers, I dreamed of getting a 2400 baud modem. I had a 300 baud modem for years. 2400 baud was just the dream, right? And if you know what baud means, right, it's bits per second. 2400, that's not very fast. Compared to like our Wi-Fi connections here, this is deadly slow. I spent my life watching Z modem download stuff for years. In the 90s, things got a bit more advanced. I played with Gopher. This is the closest thing we had to the web when I went to university. Gopher is a text-based hyperlinked system where you basically research papers at the bottom. You could reference other research papers, you could click on them, and you would jump to that university's Gopher server. So it was very much the concept of the web before the web. But everything changed. 1993, October 1993, when Mosaic, the first graphical web browser, was announced. I and thousands of other people saw that and go, okay, the world has just changed. Drop everything and start developing for this. I was working at a company, a Brazilian company actually, and I told them, look, we have to drop everything we're doing and do this. And they didn't agree, because it's hard for a company to change direction like that, especially a profitable company, to throw away the profitable stuff they're doing and shift to something new that they don't know anything about. So I had to quit and do things on my own. 2 years later, they came back and asked me, hey, please come back, you're right. We need to do this now. I'm like, yeah, it's hard to go back to a company you've quit. So in 1993, this is what web development looked like. People were writing CGI bins in C with HTML embedded right into the C code. This was not a very comfortable way to develop anything, right? You had to recompile, redeploy a C program to your server. Plus, every request had to fork an exec, which was really, really slow. So I needed something that was both more convenient and was faster than this. Most of the world moved to CGI PM. CGI PM was a Perl module for doing CGI scripts. This made it even slower, because now you have to fork and exec a Perl interpreter. Not just the small C binary, but the entire Perl interpreter had to get fired up. Perl itself was and is pretty fast, but initializing Perl is not fast, especially if you're trying to do it hundreds of times per second. It just didn't work. Plus, I didn't like the idea of programming my HTML in Perl. I wanted my HTML to look like HTML. Essentially, I wanted a templating system. Right? I wanted my HTML to look like that with just a few special tags for where you were doing something dynamic. So in this case, it's just a form that asks for your name and your age, and it prints the information back. This is what I wanted. This is what I could explain to people, and I could show them, look, you know HTML is new and fancy, but once you figure out HTML, PHP on top of it is not much more to learn. It's just a few extra tags. And especially because of this feature I had called register globals, where it would register variables that were the same name as the form fields. So if you had a field named name, another named age, you would get variables, $name and $age in your template. Really, really simple to explain to people. People today hate this feature called register globals, and is now no longer in PHP. Without register globals, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be talking to you about anything. This is what put PHP on the map. This is what got everybody interested in PHP, because it wasn't programming. It was just sort of natural. It added variables and dynamic content to HTML, essentially, is what it felt like to people. Behind the scenes, for more technical users, what I tried to pitch was a C API for the web. That was my sort of whole idea for this. And it didn't work at all. Nobody wanted to write C code. C was complicated. And C developers thought of the web as a kind of a toy. It wasn't a serious thing. And C developers are kind of assholes. I'm a C developer, right? I know me. They're hard to deal with. And a company can't hire a whole room full of C developers very easily. And the web was growing so fast, there just weren't enough C developers around. But I thought this would simplify the life for C developers. And it did. Except for every one C developer, there were 100 non-C developers that were tasked with building dynamic websites. And they kept asking for more and more features from the templating system. The templating system was just supposed to expose the business logic that you wrote in C. So you write your business logic in C, you attach it to a tag, basically, or a function call, that are then available in your templating system. But people kept asking for more and more features. I remember getting an email, I think in '94, asking for recursion. Like, why can't I call my function from within my function in my templating system? Like, why do you need a recursive template? It didn't make much sense to me. If you're going to do something recursive, do it in C or C++ in a statically typed or strongly typed compiled language where you can actually debug it. And it's like, okay, well, whatever. I looked at my state machine, and it was easy to add recursion because I just flipped back to the same state in my state machine. It's like, okay, fine, you now have recursion. A couple of days later, I get a frantic email. How do I stop it? They didn't ask for a way to stop the recursion, right? They asked for recursion. You have recursion, lots and lots of recursion. Here you go. But because of that, now you need static variables, and this templating system got more and more complicated because people wanted to write their business logic in the templating system, which was never the intent of PHP. The intent of PHP was to expose C-level functionality to HTML and to the front end of the web. And PHP itself is written that way. Everything about PHP, people say it's inconsistent. It's completely consistent, just not the way you might expect. In that, I mean, it's not horizontally consistent, but it's vertically consistent. The things it exposes are basically the libraries underneath. So the MySQL functions expose the MySQL C API. The Oracle functions, OCI 8, those functions are a one-to-one match, basically, with the OCI 8 API that Oracle provides. So vertically, PHP is completely consistent because it's a thin wrapper on top of all these libraries. But people look at it across and say, well, the Oracle functions look nothing like the MySQL functions. This is a mess. Like, yeah, if you look at it that way, it's a mess. If you look at it sort of from the bottom up, it's not a mess at all. And if you know Oracle already, you don't have to learn anything new to write Oracle code in PHP. And I honestly didn't focus all that much on the templating language itself, because my focus was C-level logic and basically getting the problem solved. I was never interested in writing a programming language. I was interested in writing a tool that would let me program less. Because I don't actually like programming. Programming is hard, it's tedious. You get bugs very easily. And it's really, really annoying. To me, programming is a whole bunch of roadblocks stopping me from solving the problem. And at the end, it's the problem that's important, not the path to get there. So I wanted to shorten it as much as possible. And to do that, I had to fix the ecosystem. Some people think that the concept of LAMP, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, kind of just was a coincidence. They all kind of matured at the same time, and they worked nicely together by accident. It wasn't an accident. A lot of us worked pretty hard on making all these pieces mesh perfectly. I spent a long time writing the Apache module for PHP, ModPHP. I also had to hack the database side. I was using this database called MiniSQL at the time. This was a couple of years before MySQL came out. And there were no cursors, there was no way to limit the result set you got back from a select. So if you did a select star on a table that had thousands and thousands of rows, you were sitting there waiting for thousands and thousands of rows to come across the wire. And this is 1995 networking. This is not 10 gig Ethernet, right? This was pretty slow. So in order to fix that, and for my web interface, often you only needed the first row, or maybe the first 10 if you're doing like search results or something. I added the limit statement. So I hacked that into this MiniSQL database that said select star limit 10. So you only got the first 10. When MySQL came around a couple of years later saying, hey, this PHP thing is pretty cool, I think it will work really well with MySQL. And to help you, we have cloned the MiniSQL API that you're currently supporting, so you can just in VI do a search and replace, recompile, and you now have MySQL support. And I tried that, it worked perfect. So I had MySQL support in like 10 minutes flat. But none of my applications worked because I had these select star limit 10. And I went back to a guy's name is Monty, the guy behind MySQL. And I told Monty, look, this is great, it works, except most PHP applications today use the limit clause. Like, what's the limit clause, he asked. I was like, it's a thing I made up. It's to limit the result set. Like, well, that's not in the standard. What standard? There's a standard? And apparently there is an ANSI SQL standard, which I had never read. But I didn't really care. I was like, well, if you want everyone to use MySQL, you're going to have to add the limit clause so that these people's apps will work as is. So he did. And then MySQL gets the limit clause, and then Postgres later, because they're trying to get people to switch from MySQL to PostgreSQL, say, oh, well, we have to add the limit clause. I think Interbase now, Ingress, it's basically sort of a virus. This limit clause has been migrating into other databases, which I find kind of fun. Other things I worked on, a lot on making shared hosting ISPs happy. Because this is how people actually use PHP, especially back in those days. We didn't have the cloud back then. We had ISPs that would put up 5 big servers and then sell thousands and thousands of virtual hosts for $5, $10, $20 a month. And that's how you hosted your code. In order to put thousands and thousands of virtual hosts on a single Apache instance, they had to have some reassurance that these thousands of hosts couldn't interfere with each other. And so I added stuff about memory limits, time limits, and also made sure that I only hooked PHP into what's called the content generation hook of Apache. This is the fatal mistake that the Perl folks made a few years later when they came out with ModPerl. ModPerl could hook into every phase of the Apache request stage, even the initial URL translation that basically took the name of the virtual host and mapped it to a document root on the disk. With a ModPerl program, you could change that. So that meant that one user could take over every single virtual host on the server and point it at their own document root with like 3 lines of Perl, which in turn meant that you couldn't, an ISP couldn't provide ModPerl to thousands of people on the same box. You'd have to have your own dedicated machine. So for PHP, you could put 10,000 clients on one machine. For ModPerl, you could put 1. And the price reflected that. So people had the choice, well, for $5 a month, you can get PHP. For $800 a month, you can get Perl. It was pretty easy choice for people at the time, right? Also did a lot of work on scaling things down. As geeks, as techies, scaling up, making things faster, and making things take more parallel requests and better concurrency, that's kind of in our nature, it's in our soul, that's what we think about. It's much harder thinking in the other direction. How do we make this tool accessible to someone who's just playing around with it for the weekend? How do we make sure that we don't, in scaling up, make the solution so complex that it's unreachable for normal humans? And we have that problem everywhere in tech these days, that our solutions get so complicated, and we put more and more gear around it, that the amount of people, the number of people who can actually grasp it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks as the project matures. And I've always tried to avoid that with PHP. It's always been a goal to keep it as accessible as possible. Right, some of the things I talked about. So the consistency things, I mean, there were some decisions along the way that people complain a lot about these days. Most of them made sense at the time. Not all of them, granted. There were a few really dumb things I did. But for example, case-insensitive function names. People complain a lot about that. That comes from the fact that in the early days of the web, nobody had chosen yet if HTML tags should be uppercase, lowercase, or even mixed case. It was a huge religious war in the mid-90s. And I didn't want to be part of it. I just said, well, whatever style you want, fine. PHP tags are not case-sensitive, so use whatever case you're used to. And that just, I never changed it. Once everyone settled on lowercase, a couple of years later, for HTML tags, I probably should have made PHP case-sensitive. I remember thinking about it, looking like, wow, there's like thousands of sites out there that would be affected by this. Forget it. Thousands of sites these days? Yeah, looking back, yes, I should have made the decision right then, because today it's tens, if not hundreds of millions of sites, right? So a couple of thousand sites being inconvenienced in 1997, yeah, if I could go back, I would probably change that. But you can't. $signs, obviously because it was easier to program, and also because I wanted to be able to do string interpolation, variables inside quoted strings. You need some kind of identifier. Registers to globals I talked about. Magic quotes, yeah, that one was me being lazy, really. That should never have gone in. People complain about the needle haystack in PHP. Do you realize that every single array function in PHP is needle haystack, and every string is haystack needle? So it's consistent vertically, but not necessarily horizontally. So over the years, since 2009 at least, we have been working really, really hard on performance. And every single version we've released has been faster, with a huge jump from PHP 5 to PHP 7. This is WordPress 4.9.8 running on PHP 5.3. So 154 requests per second we could handle. Now the exact same code, we can serve up 520 requests per second on it. And the latency, obviously, has also shrunk, right? So it takes 130 milliseconds to serve up the front page of WordPress on PHP 5.3. We're down to 38 milliseconds now on PHP 7.3. which is a pretty big performance boost. And it took a lot of work getting there. Because, I mean, today this is a 25-year-old project. And sort of, this was 20 years into the project. Suddenly, we needed to make this thing twice, 3 times, 4 times faster. And that was pretty hard. We had to go through and basically clean up all the memory management. And we got some help from the Intel compiler team as well. They ran our code through all kinds of profilers and things, looked at how we're using the Intel registers, and we completely rewrote the memory management between PHP 5 and PHP 7, which accounted for most of this performance. Because you can also see the memory use. In PHP 5.3, we needed almost 140 megabytes to serve up the front page. Now we need 15, right? Massive drop. Version-wise, we've also started, well, about 6 years ago, we changed how we're putting out new versions. We basically forced ourselves to put out a new version every year. So by November, December or so every year, there's a new version of PHP with whatever features we managed to get done that year. We're not waiting 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years for the next features before we think we have enough new stuff. Every year there's a new release. And we're also dropping support for older releases a bit faster. What it means is that the delta from one release to the next is not as big, so the amount of work to upgrade your PHP isn't as big if you do it regularly, once every, well, hopefully every year, but realistically people don't do it every year. But if you go every 2 years at least, it's still not a huge jump. In theory, at least. We haven't quite gotten everyone to agree with us on our release schedule, but we're not supporting anything older than you can see here, right? We're here, June 13th. So we're in security fix only mode on PHP 7.1. Absolutely no support for PHP 7.0 and older. If you're still on PHP 5, you're completely on your own. We're not going to fix anything for you. So if you're still running PHP 5, you're kind of lucky. You have all this performance waiting for you. But you're also kind of screwed if something goes wrong, right? We're not going to support you. Maybe your Linux distro, if you have an LTS, like a long-term support distro, they might give you a little bit of a hand by backporting some fixes, but we're not going to touch it. So please try to keep current. Some of the incentives to keep current, our new version, PHP 7.4. The first alpha release was released about 25 minutes ago, actually. So if you go to php.net, you'll see PHP 7.4 Alpha 1. Please don't run Alpha 1 on the production server. But please try it. And if you find some bugs, it's a lot easier if we catch these bugs now and fix them for you versus you trying to migrate to PHP 7.4 in 2 years and saying you can't because of this bug. Help us find the bugs a little bit earlier so you won't run into problems later. Some of the new features in 7.4, type properties. Basically, you can put types on class properties now. Arrow functions. So this syntax here is equivalent to the syntax above. It's basically just a shorter way of writing closures. And you can see they do auto capture on $y here from the outer scope, just one level out on the scope. Serialization of objects has been broken for a long time in PHP. There are edge cases that just don't work. We have a new approach in 7.4 where you can provide your own serialization and unserialization magic methods in your objects, so you can have better control over what actually happens when someone tries to serialize your object. There's a new operator. Well, just an assignment version of the null coalescing, the assignment version of question mark, question mark. So these 2 lines of code are identical. We also have weak references. These existed as a very badly written PECL extension before. Now it's right in the language and well written. Basically what a weak reference is, it's a reference that doesn't count against the reference count of an object or a variable, right? PHP is reference counted. So if you create an object, A equals new object, $B equals A. Now you have 2 references to this object. You have $A and $B, right? If you then have, say, a cache, an object cache, $C equals this object. Now, if both $A and $B are unset and go away, because there's still a link from the cache, the object won't get destroyed. Typically, you wouldn't want your cache to keep these objects alive. If nothing in your main code needs this object anymore, you could probably get rid of it, right? So what a weak reference does, it allows you to create this $C, the cache version of it, as a weak reference, meaning it doesn't count against the reference count of that object. So even though there are technically 3 references, the third one, the weak reference, doesn't count. As soon as the 2 hard references go away, the object is destroyed. Now, the really interesting feature, these next 2, opcache preloading. This lets you provide a little PHP script that tells PHP which code to load during startup. And this is module startup, meaning when your web server starts up. So if you're running Apache ModPHP, it's when you start Apache. If you're running Nginx PHP FPM, it's when you start up PHP FPM. So it only happens once per server startup, right? And then for the next billions of requests that this server takes, it doesn't do this code again. And it basically makes that code that you preload it makes it look like it's part of PHP, like part of the PHP core. And it's really important for this next feature called FFI, which is Foreign Function Interface. Other languages have this as well. It's a little bit more difficult to do in a scripting language like PHP. But with the opcache preloading, it becomes quite interesting. Because what you can do is you can wrap C libraries very, very easily directly from PHP without needing to compile it and create a makefile and all this stuff. You simply include the definition, either by loading in a header file or providing the definition yourself. So in this case, we're just wrapping one function in libc. So we provide the definition of the printf function from libc, and then we tell it this comes from libc.so. And now we have this FFI object that we can then use to call functions directly in that shared library. So a little test. I found this Gif Inc library on GitHub. A little bit more complicated. So I loaded this header file, gifinc.h. This is the exact header file that came with it. I made 2 changes to it just to make things a little easier. I added a scope, which basically gives it a name. And I also added this define here that says this is the library that's associated with this one. So this one line here gives me an FFI object that lets me call functions directly in this shared library. And just by this one line, because I've added these 2 defines, I don't need to do anything else. And you can see this library has this GIF structure for a GIF, and the whole library, the point is to do animated GIFs, so you can do multiple frames of a GIF. Add frame, close frame, new frame, or new GIF, right? So this little test script here, I created some colors. I created 16 frames. I add each frame, close the GIF, and when I show it, you'll see. So this is what my PHP script does, which is a silly example. But if you think a little bit more about this, it's really easy to wrap a low-level C library using PHP code. Using this, you still have to know some C. But all the marshalling code around the actual calls to the C library can be written in PHP. And because it's preloaded, it ends up in PHP as if it was a native extension in PHP itself. I predict in the next couple of years, a lot of simple extensions will just become composer packages that you can just compose or require directly, and they'll be written almost entirely in PHP with a little chunk of FFI code that talks to the underlying library. This means it becomes much more accessible, which means you can actually change the extension code pretty easily. You can read it, you can submit patches to it, and you can load it via Composer like all your PHP-based libraries. And I think this helps accessibility to this stuff quite a bit, but we'll see. All right. 25 years of PHP included lots of non-technical stuff too. We can't just be playing with our bits and bytes all the time, right? We have to do it for a reason. Here's one of my reasons. This was Karl in where were we? Somewhere in Germany, at a Karlsruhe, I think, at a Linux conference. He used to run around the expo floor turning off computers. He always knew, he was really good at finding the on-off switch. And the expo folks weren't super happy with him, but he was a cute kid in a PHP shirt. What could they do, right? Now he's much older, and you might have seen him on his unicycle here. He's at the conference, sitting right here. Some other things from these 25 years. I used to go to Australia every year. A bunch of geeks down there. This is Andrew Tridgell. A little bit of trivia for you. He wrote Samba, rsync, some chess code, all kinds of really cool stuff. He's arguing with Linus about some memory management, I think, in the kernel. Always very, very geeky. You can tell it's a long time ago because of the CRTs, right? Another interesting highlight of my 25 years. This was a conference in India. I don't own a suit like that. I've never worn a suit like that. I sent them a picture. I mean, conferences want a picture, right? I was in a T-shirt. They thought they were a serious conference, so no, nobody in T-shirts would be at our conference. So they photoshopped a suit onto me. And all around this Indian town, there were these huge, huge posters of me looking very weird in a suit. Another highlight was a talk I gave in Sri Lanka one time. Anyone happen to recognize who this guy might be? Very, very good. Arthur C. Clarke. If you don't know Arthur C. Clarke, you probably shouldn't be in this tent at all. I mean, come on, right? 2001, Space Odyssey, satellites, all kinds of cool stuff. That was really, really cool. Teaching Arthur C. Clarke PHP, he was sitting right in the front row, asking interesting questions. Really, really awesome. But that wasn't even the most awesome part of going to Sri Lanka for that conference. When I went there, I think it was a year after that huge tsunami that hit the South Indian Ocean and caused a lot of havoc in Sri Lanka. Entire villages along the shore were wiped out. And a lot of people died, but not from the initial tsunami. A lot of people died because they couldn't get clean water for weeks afterwards. They couldn't get clean water, blankets, diapers, all kinds of just basic logistics. And lots of countries, including France and Germany, United States, had sent all this stuff to them, but it was sitting in hangars somewhere and nobody knew where it was. So these kids at the university in Sri Lanka said, we want to fix this. And they told me about this thing that they were writing and what I thought about it. It's like, this is awesome. And they asked me, should we do it in PHP? It's like, yeah, of course, whatever. It doesn't matter. The language is irrelevant. This is an awesome project. And somewhat to my surprise, they actually did an amazing job on it. And this thing called Sahana has now been used in more than 50 natural disasters all around the world. And it has simple things like a people finder. So they have a mobile app now as well. So the rescue workers walk around, they find people, found such and such a person, put their name down, they're now in shelter 3, right? So there's a website you go to, where's my grandmother? Type in your grandmother's name, oh, she's in shelter 3. Same at the airport. Foreign aid comes in from France. Diapers, blankets, clean water, warehouse 3, right? Same things, like we need diapers. Where are they? They're over there. Very, very simple stuff. And there's like 5 or 6 different tools that are part of this. And you can get this thing up and running in 5 minutes flat as soon as something happens. And many, many countries don't have this readily available in case of a disaster. With this, anyone can do it. And see, this was used in the Christchurch earthquake, for example. And New Zealand isn't a third world country in any way whatsoever. They still used it because it was quickest and easiest to get going. And I really like this quote from Cruz Jr., National Defense Secretary of the Philippines. I mean, this is why we do these things, right? We don't program to program, hopefully. We program to make an impact. We build things. The tools are completely irrelevant. It's the end product. And if the end product is something that literally saves someone's life, even better. But even if it doesn't save someone's life, it's still the end product that's important here. PHP is completely irrelevant. It's just a tool. It's a hammer, right? Who made Da Vinci's paintbrush? Who knows? Who cares? It's what he painted with it that was important, right? A lot of geeks, myself included, get caught up in the tools themselves. And if you do that, you will also burn out, because one day you're going to wake up and say, what the hell, what am I doing, right? But if you think about the people you're affecting, the things you're building, then it's not that hard to get out of bed and get motivated and go back to hacking on whatever really tedious memory problem you might have somewhere, right? Because that's just a small hurdle to solve that big problem, or that big end user problem that you're working on. So you have to work on things that matter to you. Perhaps not to others necessarily, but if it doesn't matter to you, the end product, then especially if you're a younger programmer, you're not going to survive. You're going to end up being a terrible middle manager, right? And it's okay. If that's your dream, being a middle manager somewhere, fine, no problem. But if you really like the technology parts and you want to do that for the rest of your life, you have to work on things that matter, or you'll be burned out by the time you're 35. I think I'm almost out of time. My timer screen has gone off, so I don't know what that means. All right, I see three types of people in the world. I'm squarely in the middle here. I am not a great coder. I'm okay. I can write things and get them to the stage where they're useful, and it's more useful to fix my terrible code than to start over. That's about my level of coding. And I dream a lot as well. I have big dreams for the things that I write. And that combination, knowing enough to know what's possible and what's not possible, and somewhat how long it will take to build, makes the dreams actually doable. If you're too far on either side, if you're too far on the dreamer side, you're kind of useless, actually, right? You can dream up a plane that's 10 times faster than every other plane that we have today. Yeah, but it'll kill every passenger, so how's that useful? It's a great dream, but if you don't know enough about physics to actually get people there safely, what's the point? And on the coder side, then you're just like the nail, basically, right? Or maybe the guy who hammers the nail, right? But you have absolutely no sense of the bigger picture. All you care about is the code. And I need people like that, actually. I need a lot of coders. I need some of these hardcore coders to fix my stuff. But I also see them burning out and becoming terrible middle managers. And that's not something I wish on anyone. So to me, I think people should strive for a happy medium in between it. Maybe don't become as bad at programming as I am. That shouldn't be something you strive towards. But if you're on the dreamer side, learn a little bit of code, please, right? It is really easy to become a terrible programmer. There are tons of tools out there. There are tons of resources that help you learn to program. It doesn't take very much to get to that point, so that you at least understand the hardcore geeks when they tell you that something's going to take 8 weeks, and you look at it and go, nah, there's no way that's going to take 8 weeks, right? All right. Am I out of time? I am out of time. I thought so. Okay, I'm done. Talks, the slides are there, talks.php.net, dev break. A few other fun tools that I've been working on, Fan, PHP Spy. And if you're not on PHP 7 yet, please read the migration guide and get on to PHP 7.3. Thank you very much.